Yeah, we're live.
Everyone to this licensing committee meeting, and I'll start by taking apologies or substitutions. Any apologies? Zena, any apologies received?
No.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got any urgent matters, so I'll skip that. Any declaration of interest? I'll take it as no. Matters to be considered in private, and I have not received any notification, so I'll skip that. So we need to approve the minutes of the 9th of July meeting as a true record.
Agreed.
Can we agree to that?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. So on the agenda, item number 8, that is update on the After 6 strategy. So we are taking that as a item first presentation, and I'll hand over to Andrea to present this item after 6 p.m. strategy. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone on the Licensing Committee. Really happy to present the final Economy After 6 p.m. strategy. I know that we've talked about this for some time now, over several meetings, and I've given presentations on the progress on the development of the strategy along the way. So the report has been submitted to Licensing Committee along with the final strategy. I'm going to just give an overview about the process on the adoption and some background and conclusion on how this is going to continue moving forward. So the strategy actually was formally endorsed by Cabinet on the 18th of September, and it now represents a key framework to support the economic and social vitality of the borough during the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. So this new strategy builds upon and replaces the previous nighttime economy strategy that was developed and adopted between 2018 and 2022. This new strategy has been developed through 2 phases of consultation, engaging with over 6,000 residents, workers and businesses and key stakeholders across the borough. The strategy also aligns with broader strategic objectives of the Council, which includes creating good jobs, tackling the climate crisis and fighting inequality. As you'll see, the report and the strategy focuses on ensuring a prosperous, safe and inclusive environment for residents, workers and visitors after 6 p.m. So the key objectives and scope of the strategy is that the strategy identifies key challenges and opportunities for the borough. Challenges such as rising costs, labour shortages and the changing habits of consumers after 6 p.m. We're looking to address those through a range of initiatives designed to unlock good jobs and support existing businesses and create new growth sectors. Importantly, the strategy also highlights the need to enhance the diversity of the nighttime offer, improve safety after dark and support the well-being of evening and nighttime workers. So in terms of implementation, and the strategy emphasises a collaborative approach between the council, businesses and community groups. So there's a focus on each of Ealing's 7 towns, recognising that each town has a unique offer after 6 p.m. And the action plan within the strategy aims to support businesses in high streets, promote sustainable transport options and minimise the impact of nighttime activities on residents. The strategy also forms part of the evidence base for the review of Ealing's licensing policy, which, as you all know, is due for adoption in July next year and will be used to guide licensing decisions going forward. So to summarise, the strategy is designed to capitalise on future opportunities and address the current economic challenges that are facing Ealing's economy after 6 p.m. It's supporting the borough to become a more prosperous and inclusive place to live, work, visit and run a business after 6 p.m. And it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, it has been adopted by a cabinet on the 18th of September. And yes, I'd just like to invite the committee to acknowledge the adoption of the strategy and consider the findings as part of the ongoing review of licensing policy and applications. And yes, I welcome any questions that anyone might have.
Question from colleagues. Anyone have any question? Andrea, I don't have an indication. That means everyone is happy.
I can see 3 hands actually.
Oh.
Yes, Councillor Gareth Shaw's first.
I didn't see those hands, so maybe, well, I can't see raised hands, so if anyone can see them, then please do let me know. Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrea. I know that this has been a long sort of time coming, if you like, so really it's more of a comment, and really it's to thank yourself and other officers involved in this. Obviously, as the licensing committee, we've come to this and reviewed it regularly, and I'm very pleased now to see that it was adopted last month by Cabinet. You know, so it's a really welcome step, and I think it really does strengthen the offer and what we're looking at as when we are sitting as licensing panels, particularly, to what we can offer. You know, and it varies according to town as well, which I think is important. So it's meeting the economic needs as well as the opportunities that are there for businesses. So it's really just to say thank you very much, and you know, we'll look forward to seeing how it goes in the future.
Thank you. I really appreciate that feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Mahmood?
Thank you, Chair, and I echo what Councillor Shaw has just already said. Andrea, how often we will have an opportunity to review that strategy, or is there any specific period that we could adopt that, or we could come before that and review the strategy is working or not? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood. So this period of this strategy is 2024 to 26, and we will be reviewing the action plan through the and delivering some of the actions through the Ealing's High Streets Task Force. So there will be reviews done internally through that process and at officers' meetings. Happy to take a steer from the licensing committee as to, you know, from your perspective, when you might like us to report back. I guess I should pose that question back to the chair, perhaps.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll come to that. Councillor Gland, I have a question. Your microphone is still off, I think. Julian, can you switch on your microphone? I can't hear. Andrea, can you hear?
No, I can't,
no.
Unfortunately.
No, we can't hear you. I'll go to Councillor Anand, and then you can check your technical issues. Councillor Anand?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrea. Very good presentation. My suggestion would be that the review is done at the end of 12 months. Just for the fact that it's a new strategy, and perhaps we can see where we are actually failing or where we're doing good, so we can focus on those weaknesses or strengths. So my suggestion would be that at least someone looks at where we are and where we should be in 12 months' time, and have a report at 26, but still review our progress. Thank you.
Yeah. Julian, you want to come back, or you are still having same difficulty? Yeah, no, I can't see you. I can't hear you. Any other colleague who has any question? If I can't see, Councillor Ahmadi Jamal.
Chair. And like Councillor Shaw said, this has been a long time coming, and it's something that we have been working on for quite some time to get Ealing on board the way the other London boroughs are. So really good, actually, Andrea. Thank you so much. I do look forward, to implementing this and working with the officers. However, I am just one thing that just come to my mind is everybody on board within, the council officers, the police teams, and everybody else? Are they all geared up to put this into action? That's
Yes.
my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback and the question. So yes, internally we obviously this first stage has been all about the development of the strategy, and we're now going to be working on work streams to take some of the actions forward, and that will be with council officers and also key partners like stakeholders from the Ealing's High Streets Task Force and the police. The police actually sit on the task force and had quite a strong part to play in the development of the strategy. So yes, we will be working on the interventions with our partners moving forward. And yeah, the next stage is to develop the project plans for those.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other indication, Andrea. Julian Gland.
Chair, I was going to say, if Julian, his microphone's not working, does he want to put it in the chat so that we can at least know what the question is?
Julian, if you can hear, you can put the question.
Yeah, he's going to. He's just put his hand up. He's going to. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I cannot see any other indication for questions, Andrea. Do you need the approval, or it's just for information at this stage, Andrea?
It is more of an information report, but yeah, as sort of mentioned, it would be good just to have the. I think everyone on the call has said that they're supportive of it, and that it will be used in the future when looking at using it as an evidence base for the Ealing's licensing policy review, and when determining applications moving forward. Yeah,
that is perfectly fine, and this is the strategy that we will be obviously implementing and taking into consideration when making the decision. And I did ask this question previously, and Joe said this was not more about alcohol, it was all about the overall strategy, but I hope it will help the licensing subcommittees to take into consideration when making decisions for licensed premises. Joe, when I talk about licensed premises, I mean especially the areas where there are special policy areas. Obviously, when we are discussing this strategy, then the licensing subcommittee will obviously be keen to know what impact this will have on their decision making, especially in policy areas.
If I may, Councillor Ahmed, as well, just add to the work that Andrea and team have done is a really huge piece of work, and I was especially impressed with the amount of consultation responses that were received. And while the strategy considers, you know, the whole economy between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. and all the facets of that, licensing and licensed premises being one of them, what the consultation does is it actually provides some insight into the appetite amongst our residents and consumers and other visitors to the borough for activities in the late night economy. And then our colleagues in Andrea's team have given that context in how the council will look to support and endorse those kind of activities, also in a way that minimises and reduces any negative impacts. And I'm jumping the gun a bit to the next item about the draft policy, but we will talk in there about how we will be ensuring that the new policy aligns with the after 6 p.m. strategy, but it provides what we often miss with some of our licensing consultations, which is often leaning towards how restrictive do we need to be in terms to reduce the impacts. What Andrea's team have provided is a core of evidence and an evidence base upon which we can get an insight on the appetite for an enhanced or expanded or different activities, and that's going to be really useful. And we will be not plagiarising, that's the wrong word, Andrea, but we will be using the evidence that's within the strategy to inform us later on as part of our consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anybody read Julian's question? I haven't read it.
Yes. Yes, I can see it. Thank you, Councillor Gallant. Councillor Gallant asks if we can also focus on using the strategy to enhance Ealing as a commercial destination. And yes, the answer to that is yes. It's very much about encouraging business growth, attracting investment, job creation, supporting businesses and the visitor economy. So it is definitely going to be used for that. Thank you.
Okay. I don't see any other indication, so thank you, Andrea, for that. And we will move to the next item then. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an update on the new draft licensing policy, and Isabella is going to present that. Isabella?
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. I'll just share my presentation if I can just double check where you can see that.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So good evening, everyone. My name is Isabella Gregory, and I am the Food Safety and Licensing Manager. So I've got oversight of the work of our licensing, processing and licensing compliance teams. We have prepared for you a short presentation to bring you up to speed with all of the work we've undertaken so far, and the work that still needs to be delivered as part of us renewing our statement of licensing policy. Alongside renewing the policy, which essentially includes us amending the content of the policy, we are also undertaking what's called cumulative impact assessment, which we will discuss in a lot more detail in this presentation. Starting with our statement of licensing policy. So our current policy was implemented, as you'll be aware, on 27th of July 2020. We need to therefore ensure that a new policy is in place by then. There is no prescribed format as such for the policy, and you might have seen that different countries take different approaches as to what's essentially covered in it. But there are specific considerations in the Licensing Act 2003 itself, and the statutory guidance, which we commonly refer to as Section 182 guidance, issued by the Home Office. As part of the work on the renewal of the policy, we've obviously ensured that that policy includes all of those considerations. And you would have also noted that the licensing policy is the last of our policies to be separated from what used to be one very long document that included all of our licensing policies. What we're hoping to achieve today is for that draft policy to be agreed by the committee today to enable us then to consult on it accordingly and essentially meet the July 2025 deadline. In terms of the changes to the policy, it's really important that I kind of stress that this is very much the first draft. So it's obviously been reviewed by us and the licensing team, the licensing authority, and our legal team. But it is really important that the committee familiarize themselves with it, and any observations or feedback is passed on to us. As you would have seen, to make it easier for you to spot the changes, I've marked these changes in red in the new draft, and you can clearly see it. In general, there are no what we would consider as significant changes made. We're not proposing any changes to our core hours either, as there's nothing that we have seen or been feedback so far to suggest there is a need for that. The vast majority of changes were made to essentially bring the policy up to date, include new and various kind of considerations, and align it with other key strategies such as the after 6 p.m. strategy that you've heard about from Andrea, and especially the male violence against women and girls strategy. Where possible, we've tried to incorporate the existing policy wording into the new sections, but we essentially made the policy slightly easier for you to navigate. There are quite a few new sections, such as those, for example, discussing representations and variations, which we haven't had before, and also covering specific topics, such as, for example, delivery services or licensing at events or big venues. All of those sections were added following early conversations with a range of stakeholders and obviously our responsible authorities. We also propose that we remove from the policy what we refer to and what you'll be very familiar with as our management conditions, which currently sit at the end of our policy and include a number of what we consider as examples of conditions that help promote licensing objectives. The idea is that this document will sit separately to the policy to allow changes to be made to it without having to go through the consultation process, and enable us to include latest considerations and best practice in any of the observations that you may make. Then finally, we are reviewing special policy areas following us undertaking the cumulative impact assessment. So cumulative impact assessment essentially allows local authorities to designate areas where, in simple terms, there is more stringent licensing rules. We commonly refer to these areas as special policy areas, which is what you'll be familiar with. And determination of those areas creates what's known as a rebuttable presumption that new applications or variations to our existing licenses, which are likely to negatively impact licensing objectives, will normally be refused where representations are received. So that's not to say that no one can get a license in these areas. It's more that the applicants need to show that they understand what the local issues are and offer suitable conditions to mitigate any likely further impact on the promotion of licensing objectives where there are representations made, especially by the responsible authorities. So as you'll be familiar, we have had these special policy areas in Ealing since 2015. And on the map on the slide, you can see where these areas currently exist. For us to retain these areas, change them, or even to decide that we no longer believe that they are needed, we are required to carry out what we're discussing as a cumulative impact assessment. There are various data sources we have to consider, and some of them are listed for you on the slide, but they mainly concern crime and disorder and nuisance statistics, as you can imagine, and especially those associated with alcohol consumption, so we can link it to some of the alcohol licensed venues. We will have to, and we will have to consult on the cumulative impact assessment, as well as obviously the policy itself with various stakeholders, which will obviously include our responsible authorities, but also our license holders, businesses, and our residents. In contrast to the statement of licensing policy, which you'll be familiar with, has to be reviewed every 5 years, cumulative impact assessment has to be actually done every 3 years. And I think at this stage, it might be best if I hand you over to my colleague, Jeffro, who will talk to you about the assessment in more detail. Jeffro, if you're okay to take over from this slide.
Yes, thank you, Isabella. So I'm basically going to run through some of the things that are within the cumulative impact assessment and that form the kind of recommendations and the position that we're at now, where the report is being finalised. So if we start off just with a quick overview of how many licensed premises we've got in Ealing, you can see there's a graph which shows the number of off licenses, the number of on licenses, and the number of premises with both types of license. As of April this year, I had to take a snapshot at some point in order to be able to analyse the data. There were just over 1,000, so 1,037 premises licensed to sell alcohol and Ealing, and that's an increase of just over 8% on what the position was the last time a cumulative impact assessment was done, which was in 2019, when there were 958. Just over half of those premises are off licenses, just over a quarter are on licenses, and about 20% have both. The map at the bottom, which I'm not going to dwell on because it's very small and confusing, but it's really useful for us, that shows the individual licensed premises with the type of license that they have, and it shows basically that there are premises across the whole of the borough, and there are some concentrations that are clearly visible, and mostly that's along the sort of Uxbridge Road corridor, in particular in the centre of Ealing, but also sort of Acton, Hanwell and Southall as well. Analysis is sort of most robust based on using most of the data that we have is to a sort of lower super output area level, so that's LSOAs. Ealing has almost exactly 200. There are 199 in Ealing, and that helps us to identify sort of the densities of premises and also to compare different areas based on things like crime statistics, health statistics, and the licensing data. Next slide. So this is just looking at the density of licensed premises, obviously a key consideration for cumulative impact. This looks at how many licensed premises there are in each LSOA, and then it's a thematic map. The big map that we're talking about here looks at all of the licensed premises in Ealing, and what you can see is that the greatest concentration is around the centre of Ealing. The LSOAs with the highest density tend to be those in town centres, so that includes Greenford, and then the ones that I mentioned before along the Uxbridge Road corridor, so Acton, Ealing, West Ealing, Hanwell and Southall. The maps below show it's something that we consider. There's data that we look at that doesn't necessarily form the main part of it, but we look at all aspects of it. This looks at the off licenses, both licenses and on licenses separately. You can see that the off licenses are more spread out across the borough, and then for the premises that have both or have on licenses, which tend to be more the sort of restaurant, entertainment, pubs, late night entertainment type venues, that there's a concentration more in the south and particularly in sort of Ealing area. Next slide. So looking at some of the findings, I sort of grouped some of the findings into different categories. So these ones relate to sort of alcohol related health indicators. One of the sets of data that we have available is emergency department alcohol related admission. That doesn't necessarily mean it's emergency admissions, but it are ones that go through the emergency department. So it may be different reasons for that. It could be something that's a crisis, or it could be something that needs to be dealt with very, very urgently. There's a geographical variation in these admissions. The data is available by ward level. And what you can see on that map is that in particular, the highest rates of admission per adult were in Southall Broadway and Southall Green, and the rates there were more than double the borough average. During the period that the data relates to, which is a 3-year period from 2020 to 2023, Ealing actually had the highest rate of adult alcohol admissions to emergency departments of any London borough, and that's rate per adult or per 1,000 adults. So it isn't it's something that is very much a problem that has particular geographical features, and is certainly a consideration. At the bottom we've got London Ambulance Service alcohol related attendances, and those are available by LSOA. So there were over 1,600 alcohol related attendances by the LAS in 2023. That is about 4% of all ambulance attendances in the borough. And the highest levels were generally in and around town centre locations in the south of the borough, and as such they're very much co-located with many of the existing special policy areas. Incidents, looking at the connection between LAS incidents and our late night economy and our licensed premises. Incidents peaked at weekends and between 3 p.m. and midnight. So that does give some strength to the idea that actually this can be linked to cumulative alcohol consumption over the day and at particular periods. And just out of interest, 44% of those attended to were aged between 36 and 50 years. That was the peak age group. There were relatively few younger people in the data, and actually that can suggest that there's a particular group of people that are more likely to be problem drinkers or have issues with alcohol when they're out and about and require London Ambulance Service attendance. Next slide. These two indicators look at antisocial behaviour, so noise complaints and antisocial behaviour calls to the police. What you can see with the noise complaints, so I looked at noise complaints where these were specifically linked to licensed premises with an on-licence or a both licence, and where that complaint was categorised as being amplified music, raised voices or other commercial noise, which are the categories that we would tend to associate with those type of venues. Almost a third, there are 132 in a 2-year period, so it's not that high in terms of doing a meaningful analysis, but almost a third of those complaints were within one of the existing SPAs. The highest totals for that were Acton, which had 18, and Southall, which had 12. And again, you can see the geographical distribution with Southall and Ealing and Acton all being the areas with the highest volume of noise complaints from licensed premises. Looking at the police recorded antisocial behaviour calls at the bottom, that's the volume of calls per LSOA. There were a lot more of these. There were 10,700 antisocial behaviour calls recorded by the police, and that's in 2023. It is a valid indicator to consider, but ASB calls can result from a variety of issues in different settings and scenarios. So they're not always going to be, they're certainly not always going to be linked to alcohol consumption. The highest levels tend to occur in and around town centre areas. This is a common feature of what we're looking at, but in many cases, these were in or close to existing special policy areas. There are also some higher levels in some parts of North Acton, West Ealing and Northolt. Northolt was a very small area that was kind of isolated. North Acton is an area that we see some higher levels of crime and antisocial behaviour, but it's a very large area. And West Ealing is one that sits very much sort of between Hanwell and Ealing along the Uxbridge Road corridor, and it does come up from time to time in various crime categories. And also when we did the Safe Reading for Women survey, it came up as being somewhere that people experienced antisocial behaviour and fear of crime. So that was the area that sits closest to one of the existing SPAs, but we're not in it. Next slide. And finally, looking at these bits, this is crime and alcohol flagged crime indicators. So I looked at all crime. The police are able to apply a marker to crimes if there are incidents that they think are where the suspect or the victim has been drinking. Maybe a suspicion or it may be known that's happened. And over 2 years, there were 536 crimes which are mapped in Ealing and which were flagged in that way to show that the suspect or victim had been drinking. Most of those were incidents of violence, so 70% of that total were incidents of violence some way. The highest volume of offences were in Ealing and Southall town centres, and over a quarter of the total for Ealing occurred within one of the existing special policy areas, which is quite high given this small area, relatively small area that they cover. Incident levels peaked at weekends and between 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. And again, that shows a link to potentially the hours of people socialising and entertainment hours. And at the bottom, I've also looked at non-domestic, so violence with injury, so the more serious assaults, so mostly actual bodily harm and grievous bodily harm. Incidents of that where that occurs between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. Over a 2-year period. Again, looking at crimes that are most likely to be indicative of the kind of thing that may be associated with alcohol consumption. There were over 1,800 of those offences in that 2-year period. Saturday was the peak day, and the highest crime periods in the week were Friday evening into Saturday and Saturday evening into Sunday. Looking at the map, it's almost a map of our town centres. Ealing, Southall, Greenford and Acton all feature as higher crime areas within that category. North Acton and Norwood Green also feature. Norwood Green is somewhere that comes up often on these kind of measures because there is violent crime that gets reported at the hospital or happens at the hospital. So it's not necessarily indicative of anything that we can do anything about in a public space scenario. And again, North Acton comes up there, which is one of those areas that is emerging. It's effectively a newly developing town centre. Next slide. Okay, so to try and put these together in a sort of meaningful way and give us an idea, give us a steer about how we might assess where our cumulative impact is highest. It's kind of looking at the data and trying to design a process where the best cumulative impact, where the greatest cumulative impact exists in the borough. So we put together all 199 LSOAs, gave them a score for each of all of the factors that we'd examined. So there were 12 in total. Some of that is the one factor where I've looked at volume and density, or rate and volume. But effectively for all of those 12 categories, I scored them and having ranked them based on the data that came out, and gave them a score between 0 and 3. So basically the top 10% of LSOAs got 3. The top 25%, if they've got 2, if they're in the top 50%, they got 1, and if they weren't in the top half, they didn't get a score. I then added those together and mapped them thematically to show where the cumulative impact was likely to be highest and lowest across Ealing. I produced 2 versions of the map, so one where all 12 factors were weighted equally, and one where I weighted it so that the volume and density of licensed premises, which is obviously a key component of the CIA, accounted for half of the total cumulative score. Interestingly, both maps are very similar. I do actually present them both, and there were minimal differences between them. Consideration was then given to some additional factors which were not suitable for whatever reason for assessing and mapping in the same way, often due to the way the data is available, and then a final recommendation for special policy areas, and the revision of those was discussed. Next slide. So here are the 2 maps. This is the big map is the unweighted one, so all factors weighted equally, and the whole of Ealing assessed on an LSOA basis. And you can see that the areas that we're talking about that are the ones the highest scores are in red, and you've got areas in Southall, you've got Greenford, you've got Hanwell, West Ealing, the centre of Ealing, and the centre of Acton as well. And in the small map there, just for information, is just where it's weighted. So that was the second version, and you can see that the map is almost identical in terms of the areas that are highlighted. So looking at some of the additional factors that are interesting and definitely add richness to the picture and worthy of consideration. These are park guards who do patrols on behalf of Ealing Council, and these are the incidents that they've had which relate to alcohol. So these are street drinking or disorderly street drinking. Again, their data is available they have 2 years of rolling data that's available at any time. So this is 2 years to August 2024. There were 345 interactions that they had with street drinkers, and as recorded by them, and over 75% took place in one of the above locations. So what I'm supposed to mapping everything, this is all of the locations where there were 3 or more street drinking incidents. The data that they have doesn't relate to wards or LSOAs or towns, it actually relates to specific locations, and those are the sort of diamond shapes with the numbers in show where those locations are, and I have included the existing special policy areas there. So the majority of locations where they did have large numbers of street drinking interactions were within or adjacent to one of the existing special policy areas. The most notable exception again is sort of Dean Gardens in West Ealing, which is the 24, almost in the centre of the lower part of the map, and that was the prime location. And it's worth noting their scores, the number of incidents down the side show that Southall Park by some margin has the highest number of street drinking incidents that park guard encounter. Chain, which is a network that, oh sorry, there's a comment there. Can I address that at the end, Councillor Gallant?
Yeah, you carry on, please.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. This is Chain, which is a network that provides data on rough sleepers, and it's a lot of graphics, but effectively the top left there, you've got a graph showing that the annual number of rough sleepers in Ealing has been increasing since 2021 by some considerable margin. So there were 710 in the last year. Bottom right, the annual top 5 boroughs by rough sleeper volume. Ealing is a big player in terms of the number of rough sleepers. We were 3rd in 2021 and again in 21-22, 4th in 22-23 and 3rd again in 23-24, and that's out of all 32 boroughs and the City of London. In the bottom left, you can see the geography of where those rough sleeper interactions take place. And again, it's actually more spread out than some of the maps that we've seen, some of the thematics that we've seen, but there is a concentration in Southall along into Ealing and Acton, and then some areas of Greenford, Northall and North Acton as well. And finally, just to sort of link it together with what we're looking at, they assess all of the rough sleepers who agree to have an assessment are assessed for particular needs, support needs that they have. Over 40% of the rough sleepers in Ealing have an identified alcohol related issue. So it is it's very much a relevant factor for consideration within the CIA. And as a result of the work, and at this stage, this is a suggestion, it's a recommendation. The recommendation is that the special policy areas that are adopted are as shown. So that is 5 areas, although 2 of them is suggested are linked. So that is Southall, and it's effectively very similar area to what was covered at the moment, but it's a more defined shape. It's a slightly different shape. It's Greenford, around Greenford Broadway. It is Hanwell, West Ealing, moving into Ealing itself, and it is the centre of Acton. These are purely drawn on LSOA boundary basis, and there's recommendations of 2 minor variations. So one of them is to include the south side of the A4020, so that's Acton High Street and the Vale in the Acton SPA, and also to include just purely the stretch of the Uxbridge Road itself, Ealing and West Ealing, to create a single SPA for Hanwell, West Ealing and Ealing, because there's a very small gap between the 2, but because of the shape of the LSOAs, it would make more sense to just include the road as a variation on that. Next slide. Okay, so just to sum up, yeah, I'll carry on here and I'll hand over to Isabella at the end. Okay, so the analysis indicates that the existing special policy areas remain the focal areas of greatest cumulative impact. Some minor changes to the existing areas may be appropriate, and that's reflected by the way that the map is drawn up that you've just seen. So specifically, that's a removal of the northern arm of the Acton SPA, which extends north along Horn Lane, and there's a Beaconsfield Road section of the Southall SPA. Neither of those has a large number or dense concentration of licensed premises, and it was notable when looking at the dots on the map that actually they didn't, although they were adjacent to these areas, they didn't have a big concentration. Combining the Ealing and Hanwell SPAs into one area to include West Ealing Town Centre is also recommended as shown on the map. Redefining the extent of the special policy areas using lower super output area boundaries as the primary basis would definitely be beneficial in terms of removing the arbitrary and sometimes confusing nature of where the boundaries for each SPA fall. That would be pragmatic for both applicants and licensing officers. Nevertheless, there may be some slight variations, and a couple were suggested on the previous map, to the LSO boundaries to be considered before finalising them. Examples would be to ensure that both sides of major roads are included within a special policy area, or to consider limiting an SPA where there's an obvious natural barrier, such as a railway line that can't be crossed or a large green space where development is unlikely. There may also be benefit in a consultation around how much of the southern extent of Southall, I'm thinking particularly around the Old Town, is included within the SPA, because that is it's definitely the area that was the most unusual shape before, and it remains. The data could be taken either way, and it's definitely up for discussion. The CIA report, which includes and expands upon some of the content that I've run through quite quickly today, and apologies for that, is being finalised, and it will be subject to the consultation. And I hand back over to Isabella.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Isabella, shall I invite questions to Jethro, or you want to continue?
I'll just cover the next steps and then the timelines, and I'm sure there's going to be loads of questions, so we'll definitely take those. Thank you very much, Jethro. So
Well, those who have questions, just hold on to it, and those who are putting anything in the chat, I'm not reading. So if anyone can read, then we'll deal with it later. Yes, Isabella, please carry on.
You'll be pleased to know that this is a very short slide where I'll just talk about the next steps. So in terms of what happens next is, so we're hoping that the committee can approve the draft policy today and the recommendations as part of the cumulative impact assessment that Jeffrey just covered. What we have to do next is we have to do a statutory consultation. So we hope to do that in November with a view to end it at the end of this year. This will then enable us to consider any responses that we might get, including your feedback, and then make changes to the policy for the second draft to be presented to the committee in February. We then aim to make final changes, post any future feedback that we received about February and March time, which will then mean that we'll be asking the committee to approve the final in April 2025 before we take it to the full council to have it approved by the July 2025 deadline. So I'll hand it back to you for questions. I might just skip back and leave the presentation for a few minutes on the proposed special policy areas, and then we can take questions.
Thank you. Okay, there were some notes. Jess Murray has put some notes on the chat, so you can read those. Julian Gland, you might want to change Southampton Gardens. Okay, well, those can be noted, and those who are relevant officers can take note of those. So I'm going to go to questions now. Joe, you wanted to say something at this stage? Do you have come on camera?
Oh, well, I was getting ready to answer questions. I just wanted to add, really, Councillor, just quickly that this, as Isabella said, this is the first draft of the policy. So quite a lot of work has gone in with our different stakeholders, primarily responsible authorities, but also colleagues, for example, in public health that deal with alcohol and drug rehabilitation and others. So this is certainly not the only bite of the cherry that people will, or bite of the apple that people will get. But what we're really requesting is the committee's approval to proceed with the policy as drafted and with the special policy areas as suggested, and then we would go to consultation, so that there would be further public consultation with the responsible authorities, and importantly, consultation with licensed premises and trade associations and other business groups. So there will be at least one more draft policy that after Christmas, once we've done the consultation, we'll come back to committee to say these are the consultation responses. And these are any suggested amendments and a second draft policy for the committee to read through, review again and approve before some finalisation. And then just finally, I'll add that Isabella, I mean, Jethro's done some amazing work for us with in terms of the analysis, which has been really useful. I think we've got a really good, strong cumulative impact assessment done and a good strong evidential basis for our recommendation, and Isabella's done some amazing work putting this together, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying that she'll be going on imminent maternity leave soon, so the committee will be pleased or displeased to hear that I will be taking over the responsibility for the consultation, seeing this through to the end. But yes, thanks Councillor Ahmed for allowing me a few extra words.
Well, the committee will definitely be pleased and displeased as well, because she's going for a good cause, and obviously we will miss her, but hopefully we'll see her back soon with some new guest, hopefully. Jethro, you had a very good presentation, very impressed with your presentation, very thorough, and you have questions now. And I'll start by taking Councillor Ball.
Thank you.
Your microphone again, Councillor Ball.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Good. Right. Yeah, so I had two questions. The first one was a bit of a technical question about the way that the boundaries are drawn. Clearly, super output areas are necessary when we're gathering evidence, so police information and so on. But I just wondered why we're using super output areas and lower super output areas to set up the boundaries and then having to twiddle it along Exbridge Road, because I mean, well, yes, the council's GIS system is capable of doing any arbitrary boundaries, which is what we use for drawing up electoral boundaries and also the neighbourhood planning when we've had, neighbourhood planning referendums, things like that. So I just wondered, I mean, clearly you've got the evidence base has to come from that data, but would it be better to draw the boundaries of the area kind of around the specific streets that are problematic on a street by street basis? I've got one more question. It's separate, so
you can ask the question.
So ask the other one. Okay. So the other question is, I'm interested in how the licensed estate has changed since the previous policy. So I see there was you said in your presentation there was an increase in licensed premises overall, but has there been an increase or decrease in on licenses, and within that, are there trends in terms of increases in some towns and decreases in others, or differences between pubs, clubs, restaurants? So just be interesting to see how things are modifying. So, but anecdotally, we hear that it's a very tough time for pubs and bars, but it'd be interesting to see how the statistics back that up or don't. Thanks.
Who wants to answer this, Jethro or Joe?
Yeah, if I start off, and I may hand over to Joe and Isabella afterwards. On the second question, Councillor Ball, the increase is all in terms of off licenses. There are very similar figures and or slight decreases in on licenses and premises with both. So the increase is, and it's not specific to a particular area, so it's a general slight increase in the number of off license premises across the borough, basically. In terms of the first question, which is the one that I may hand back over, we did look at both. We have got previously they were drawn up with bespoke boundaries. I drew up something that was bespoke boundary again, and we had a discussion around what the best way to take that forward was. And I think this was the closest that we got to being happy with it. However, Isabella and Joe may have particular views on that.
If I just add to Jeffrey's comments on the boundaries, as he's discussed, we've looked at various things. Essentially, there's always going to have to be a cut-off, but I've looked at the approach taken by other countries, and they predominantly use bigger areas. So as you'd be familiar with our existing special policy areas, it's very much just, it looked like someone's drawn it by hand, and there's always that kind of cut-off, which is why essentially we believe that what you've seen is it's probably better to use to kind of accommodate for some of the things that we're seeing. For example, in West Ealing, the licensed premises are spreading outside of the special policy area, so we're hoping that having slightly bigger boundary, we'll be able obviously to kind of have that special policy in place for the next 3 years and for it to be still relevant. I'm not sure whether Joe, you want to add anything to that?
I think Councillor Ball is satisfied with that response, so I don't want to poison it with anything else.
The only thing I'll ask to your second question in terms of how the kind of licensing has changed, because we were doing this work, we really looked at our data and we also used it as an excuse to clear it up. So essentially what you might see is that we've actually lost quite a bit of premises, is because we really looked at what was there, and we've removed with Jeffrey's help quite a few premises where they were just kind of lingering on our system. They were not surrendered, which obviously the license order they should do, and we've cleared it up. So that's kind of in overall, you will see that the number has dropped in licenses compared to last year, but that's because the data now is a lot more reliable because we've really cleared it up.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Anand, your question, please. Praveen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Isabella, for your presentation, and we wish you a happy maternity leave. I just want to emphasize something which I have raised questions in the past, and discussing our policy and our policy procedures here. It's about the alignment with planning. What work are we doing both with government and our neighbouring boroughs to put pressure on now our new government to actually align the planning and the licensing part of the conditions. When we receive a licensing application, we're told categorically that licensing has got nothing to do with planning. And a lot of the applications come where we have a cumulative impact. And I'll come back to that question in a moment. So my first question is, are we doing any work alongside our policy to work alongside with government and our neighbouring boroughs to actually put pressure that the licensing applications can only be verified or validated once a valid planning permission is in existence? That's my first question about alignment. And my second question comes with cumulative impact of the work, and especially the shisha bars, which are non-regulated. What work are we doing again with government and with our neighbouring boroughs with the shisha bars, which are unregulated, which actually comes again in the presentation? It was brought to attention about North Acton. Now, North Acton, I know North Acton quite well because that's where I live. And the east side of Park Royal borders with North Acton. So that's where all the shisha bars are located. So what work are we doing here? Because with the alignment of cumulative impact, as we've heard, with the shisha bars, what policies do we have in place where, or can we actually apply to government to actually be exempt from certain situations and actually make special conditions on shisha bars? So my question comes back to alignment on planning and the work that we're doing to regulate shisha bars. Thank you.
Yeah, Isabella, this is similar to what I asked you in my email. It's quite confusing for a general public that you have a license to operate a restaurant, but you don't have a planning. So for a general public, it's quite confusing. And this is what Councillor Anand is also talking about. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I completely agree with you. It is confusing. However, the 182 guidance, which I've mentioned before, it is very clear, and it makes it very clear saying that there are separate regimes and they're not to be looked into as we should be perhaps looking. For example, the place hasn't got any planning permission, so we don't grant the license. The guidance is very clear. We shouldn't be doing it. What we're doing to align it is we are including our planning department in any applications. So when people apply for the licenses before they are granted, our planning department can reach out to them and speak to them about necessary planning permissions. But as you can appreciate, planning permission sometimes takes years and months, and that's perhaps why that kind of legislation and the guidance is very clear in saying we shouldn't be taking it into account. But we are obviously working with our planning authorities in terms of making sure that they are aware of those applications. And then in regards to the email that you've mentioned, we have spotted that when we issue our licenses on nowhere on our correspondence does it actually state specifically that the license doesn't mean that they've got a permission from the planning department or building control or similar. So we have now amended it, and our letters will include specific statements stating why this relates to you being able to, sell alcohol, provide late night refreshment. That does not mean that you have planning permission. So we are making our applicants aware of it. We are working with our planning authority. I'm not aware of any consultation at the moment being done in regards to the Licensing Act, but it is an old act, which is obviously over 20 years old now. So perhaps that is something that will be looked into to be brought in together. And then in terms of the shisha premises, and I know we've discussed it on a number of times now, and it's definitely a topic that I seem to be talking at every meeting, whichever meeting I go to. Shisha is not licensable. That's why our policies don't apply to it. And I know that you've seen on some of the maps that the areas where we do have quite a few shisha premises are very much there in terms of the heat maps. But there's not many licensed premises in there, and obviously not many of those not many of those are licensed premises. And the other thing that the cumulative impact assessment and the legislation and the guidance states in regards to us specifying special policy areas is that we need to be able to document it as it is. So probably what Jeffro might further comment on this, we definitely looked at the Acton, top of Acton, etc., as potentially designating it as a special policy area, but it's not enough there for us to suggest that that would be really reasonable at this stage. It might be that when we look at it in 3 years' time, that heat map is going to, go even darker in simple terms, as in there's more issues that we're noticing, and that's when we will be looking at potentially including that area. But as it is, A, there's not enough licensed premises perhaps in there, and then B, the issues that we are seeing, they're not as prevalent as they are in other areas. Not sure whether Jeff or you, Joe, want to add something.
Jess has come online. I think Jess want to add something.
I was just going to say, in relation to the point raised by Councillor Anand around licensing and planning legislation, there was a white paper, a Lord's Law review done quite a few, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a proposal around aligning licensing and planning processes, and that was quite firmly rejected by a number of different parts of local government, the industry, lots of other aspects, and obviously with a focus around house building obviously being key with some of the conversations around any kind of planning reform. I'm not sure we'll see that kind of legislative change because it was explored, and I think there were a lot of concerns and challenges brought out of it. But yeah, I think we need to make sure we link it up, but I think we also have to demonstrate that the two processes are independent of each other. So as Councillor Ahmed, I saw his email recently, and I think we are just reviewing all of our letters, literature and application forms to make it clear that there's a direction on there around people understanding they have to separately apply around planning, and it's not, permission's not inferred one way or the other. So that's about the best that we can do, I think, at this stage.
Thank you. Jasper, you want? Yes, Isabella?
The other thing I would just add to it, sorry, Jeff,
right.
on the planning issue is that quite often people, and it works very similar when we deal with gambling premises, they can apply for the license before they start trading and before they get necessary permissions, which is perhaps what that flexibility is there, because just because they get granted the license, it doesn't mean that they have to start operating obviously straight away. So, and it is very much the same with gambling premises where they have to seek other permissions alongside obviously planning department, etc. So that just kind of, I thought I would add that on because it provides some perspective.
I think if it's mentioned clearly on the license, then that should cover it. That is where the confusion is. Yeah, Jathro, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Isabella was just inviting me to talk about North Acton. Looked very much at the location of licensed premises in the North Acton area, that they are very spread out. There is a reasonable number of premises there, but it's a very large area. They're spread quite widely out. Lots of the off licenses there, or a significant proportion of them, are online only retail. They're food brokers, food distributors, and packing. So actually there is no sort of single concentration that would be appropriate to cover with a special policy area at this time. I think it's an area that is developing, and certainly with sort of Old Oak Common and North Acton developing, we may see that it develops into its own town centre, and that may be appropriate in the future. But I think at the moment it wouldn't be suitable for a special policy area as we stand.
And if I just add to it as well, in terms of shisha premises, some of them are licensed, as Jeffrey is saying, but quite a few of them, they don't provide any alcohol and they're not licensed to supply alcohol. So obviously we are specifically looking here because that's where we're seeing issues, that the special policy areas, as you're looking at it, they are proposed due to the issues that we're seeing with alcohol consumption, and that's, with noise and nuisance, etc.
Thank you. Councillor Mohammed. Zaina, there was a message from Mohinder Midha, but Mohinder Midha is not licensing committee member, so I don't know why she wants to come in. Zaina, this is for you.
Okay.
Yes, Councillor Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Jeffro and Isabella. It's quite useful data. My question is in particular for Southall. It seems to be an area of concern. It did come up quite a number of times with the issues that's having across the board. It seemed to be Southall is number one, if anything. I just wanted to know, is there any in a pipeline special measures to mitigate those kind of areas of concern that has been highlighted in terms of antisocial behaviour or the alcohol consumption? Are you looking into the number of unlicensed premises that in those areas that might be causing these issues? So I just wanted to understand if there's any follow-up measures that is being discussed or will be recommended. Thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, South Hall is a special policy area, which clearly means that the local authorities are aware. But I'm going to ask either Jess or Joe or Isabella to respond to this, whoever.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Ahmed. As you described, Southall is then we're actually looking at slightly expanding really it when you look at the kind of at the map. So that's what we're doing. We're putting the special policy area in there to mitigate especially issues that we're seeing with a number of off licenses, which are fueling some of the street drinking. And in terms of what else we're doing is I will cover in the next update some of the proactive work that we're doing, and quite a lot of that work is starting to happen in Southall because that's where we are seeing issues popping out. So but I'll cover that probably under the next item really. And I'll hand over to Jess or Joe whether you want to add anything on that.
I might just come in and have a quick point around, this is one of, in relation to antisocial behaviour associated with alcohol consumption and some of the information Jethro provided you, like the hospital and health outcomes in relation to alcohol. Some of that we see significantly in Southall, and so the policy and the work that Isabella and Joe do in this space is part of the wider partnership that sits within my service, which includes the Parks Patrol stuff, which you'll have seen in the presentation, whereby Park Guard are on our housing estates, on the Havelock estate, for example, or in Southall, Rex Southall Park, other localities, and effectively challenging people who are drinking excessively and behaving in an antisocial way. You then have people like Daniel Malone, George, Paul Murphy's team around the ASB side. So they're working with the local policing teams to try and tackle those behaviours. But where we see significant street populations, you will see that intersection with lots of different vulnerabilities, including alcohol and drug use, kind of vulnerabilities around health and other things. And so, you know, this is one part of various different aspects that mean that there's more risk around some individuals, both in terms of how they behave on the street and how that makes other people feel in the context of antisocial behaviour, but also in terms of how their health implications take place and their need to be, you know, treated by ambulance or referred into hospital and other things like that. So this is a part of a wider objective. Isabella's team, along with the police and others, review and take enforcement action around off licenses who don't comply with the license. I think you referenced places who don't have a license. I don't think there's a significant issue with people selling alcohol without a license in Southall. It's more about ensuring the places that do sell aren't selling to people who are already drunk or, you know, some of those other behaviours, and we achieve that through the application of the policy and the enforcement of the licensing conditions that you guys place on venues when you determine their licence at a committee, or when a licence is granted by Isabella's team because there's no objections or what have you to it. So this is a big part of a much bigger approach to try and manage the negative effects of alcohol whilst allowing kind of people to access it and use it in a non-negative way as well.
Thank you. Thank you. The next is Councillor Mahmood.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. What is Jethro? Is a really look like you're a good data analyst person, and I must say that the data you produce is very good. But what is not good about the data is Ealing is the highest rate of alcohol-related admission in London, which is not really great. So I'm just wondering, while we are doing this draft policy to implement for next 2 years, how do you think we could prevent this thing happen, or to decrease the rate of the alcohol-related admission? It is a bit embarrassing if we are in number 1 in London. So I just wanted to see what is in there in the new draft policy, which can cover that area? That's the first question. Second is, I don't know either I missed that or not. So in terms of female victim violence and sexual crime, so what is the ratio? Are we better than previously year, or these crimes and these sexual crime have been increased now? So these two questions, if you clarify me, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Jethro.
No, I was just going to say the female victim and crime pattern analysis is something that we do anyway. It's not something that I have included specifically within this. It is something that I've looked at, and actually it may be, Isabella, Joe, something that we can incorporate in the final report in terms of something specific around that. I do have that data. And I mean, it was included in some of the early data packs, but we didn't include it in the final version. So actually, Councillor, maybe that's a good point, and it may be something that we can incorporate. In terms of the alcohol admissions and the sort of health aspect of that, I don't know actually. Isabella, do you have, or Joe, do you have any ideas around how we're interacting with our health colleagues on that?
Joe and Jess are waiting to come on. Yes, Isabella, you carry on.
It's a very complex issue. So obviously those hospital, we don't know exactly who's being admitted, but I presume obviously one of the things that you've seen on the slides is that we have a high proportion of rough sleepers in Ealing. So obviously that will be kind of probably linked. We are working very closely with our public health colleagues on a number of projects. One of it is actually, there are very much part of this kind of early consultations that we're having on the licensing policy, and some of the things that you'll be seeing marked in red as in changes to the policy are because they are the kind of suggestions or considerations that our public health colleagues have asked us to include for you to consider when you grant the licenses. Yeah, not sure whether Jess, you kind of want to add to it. And yeah, the other thing I would just kind of quickly mention, obviously, that there is need for proactive work, which again I'll cover in a second. But it's probably a whole council-wide issue really, rather than just licensing to start with.
No, and I think that's a good start of an answer there, Isabella. I suppose my initial kind of response to that, Councillor Mahmood, would be in the context of what we're really discussing here is the supply and retail sale of alcohol. That's what this policy is about. So, you know, part of the challenge of the negative effects of alcohol, and the negative effects of alcohol are numerous. You know, there's definitely a profile in the context of domestic abuse and things like long-term health effects from people who drink too much alcohol, or in addition to the kind of immediate ASB violence and other things that can also take place in that context. So you have short, medium and long-term effects of alcohol. This is about the retail sale of alcohol. So it's about responsible retailing and making sure the availability and supply of alcohol via a retail setting, so shops, off licenses, restaurants, pubs, what have you, is done in a thought through, and the impact of that, I suppose, is considered in the widest context. So that is part of the response to that. You will then have aspects that are in terms of public health and primary health responses to alcohol and the effect of alcohol. You'll also then have other aspects in terms of how we manage the kind of crime and ASB factors, which I've referenced before. I think it's relatively safe to say that, you know, in terms of West London, Ealing has a relatively high rough sleeping number. I think that was detailed in the slide. And where you have vulnerabilities and no recourse in particular, I think is a challenge in terms of our street population. You will have a higher instance of other vulnerabilities and challenges like drug and alcohol misuse and things like that, other health implications as well. So I think it's complex, as Isabella said. I think we are kind of dealing with a small part of what is a quite large and challenging issue. And so I think this is a good approach at trying to manage and make sure that the number of venues and the availability of alcohol is considered quite closely. The presumption against approval that a special policy area and a cumulative impact area provides is useful, but the supply can only go so far to solving the problem, I suppose. And as long as that's responsibly retailed, then addressing some of those other challenges will sit elsewhere, whether that's on a local level or whether it's a regional or national level.
Thank you. Councillor Shaw.
Chair, I
Sure.
wanted to come back on that.
Later
please.
on, Tariq, if we have time.
Thank you.
It's related to the same question anyway.
Okay, Councillor Shaw, let Councillor Mahmood just finish off, please, if you know.
Yeah,
Yes,
of course,
Councillor
Chair.
Mahmood.
So don't you think the JES licensing team, if we will be more sensitive about our special policy area, or more if we will broaden our more special policy area, do you think that indicator could be mitigated?
That Councillor Mahmood, the expanding the area is evidence-based, so we can only expand if there is an evidence, and this is what Jethro has just analysed and explained. So we are expanding wherever possible, but we cannot just randomly expand it.
I would also just add to that, Councillor Ahmed, that's a good point, and you're absolutely correct there. We enforce and ensure responsible retailing alcohol across the whole borough. It's not restricted to these areas, it's just there's an additional requirement within these areas. So Isabella and Joe's team do test purchasing and look at venues in all parts of the borough where they might be selling alcohol to somebody who's already drunk, for example, or selling alcohol outside the times that has been specified either by you in committee or via the process. So it's about achieving responsible retailing to make sure that alcohol isn't accessible to people who are drunk or at times and in places where we don't want it to be. So this is about enhancing that approach and ensuring that responsible retailing approach. So it's not to say that it doesn't happen elsewhere, it's just the evidence base that Councillor Ahmed has outlined means that there is an additional hoop for applicants to jump through in these key localities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Shaw.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And thank you, Chair, for a really comprehensive and data-driven analysis that really does lay, I think, a really strong background for the review of the special policy areas. I think Joe actually dealt with one of my comments, which was the arm on Horn Lane, the northern arm. And I had a quick look down the members of this committee, and it suddenly struck me that there weren't members from Acton on it particularly. But you've reassured me that there's consultation process, so the Acton councillors can be drawn in, and will be able to respond to it. I think it's important to have that local knowledge, and really just a comment, as my ward lies within the borders of sort of Ealing and West Ealing, is that I very much welcome the extension going from Ealing through West Ealing and towards Hanwell, and recognise that this is an area that does have particular problems. There is a cumulative impact on the numbers of off licences particularly. We know from the panels that we sit on the number of times they are within this area, and of course travelling along the Uxbridge Road there is very easy on buses and so on. So in terms of ASB and what have you, then we have the same groups of people travelling across this. There is no sort of people, we get too caught up in boundaries very often, whether it's political boundaries or geographical boundaries that are able for everybody to go through. So I think that extending that special policy area makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Any officer wants to have any comment on this, or is
that sounds good?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Amarjeet Jammu.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, most of my questions have already been answered, but just one final one. Jack, thank you so much. That was really comprehensive, really appreciated. My one is actually around the rough sleepers, the street homeless that you talked about earlier. What sort of additional help is available to them when these rough sleepers are found, or is that not a question for this committee?
It's probably a question, Councillor Jam, of our public health team, but we are liaising with them very closely, and I know that they've been actually given a lot of additional funding to deal with their kind of rough sleeping issues in the borough. And one of the things that is not in the policy, but you will have available to you at some point soon, is you will have a map of where some of the rehab centres are, etc. So when you are granting the licenses, you can consider those, obviously the proximity, because we don't necessarily want to have a, you know, a centre for people that have alcohol problems surrounded by off licenses. So we are working very closely with them, but that probably question would be answered best by our public health colleagues.
Thank you.
Jess, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so we have a homelessness service at the council who commission St Mungo's to do outreach. So where you find, you know, people rough sleeping and things like that, Street Link is the first port of call, and that engages with them and opens up various different supportive aspects around either housing or other support or advice, depending on whether they have recourse and things like that. So that would normally, I think it's been at scrutiny. There is a housing and environment scrutiny panel, and so that's probably the right space to have a conversation about what the offer is in relation to homelessness in the borough.
Thank you. Councillor Nagpal. Councillor Nagpal, yes. Can you switch on your microphone, please?
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, I wanted to understand, just based on the Ealing having the highest rate of alcohol admissions, can you tell me by how much? In terms of the second borough, just for context to understand really how dire the situation is in Ealing. Thank you.
Yes and no. I can't right now. The data was actually provided by our health team and the health analyst that I work with. So they gave me specific data that relates to Ealing, and they put it in context for me in terms of when we do the health of the borough assessment, what the headlines and how we compare. I can get that data. I'm very happy to obtain it and forward it and show what other boroughs are up at the top and how far Ealing is away from the average and how far Ealing is away from the next highest boroughs. But I don't have that to hand, and I don't have that data at the moment. Obviously for this assessment, it wasn't necessarily relevant, but I agree it's an interesting bit of insight that actually could help us address problems.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Nagpal?
It is, yeah. I mean, if it is possible to follow up with that data, Jethro, I'd be very grateful. Just for context, for when we are on licensing hearings, I just think it would be good to know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will email you in the next few days.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ball, is that a legacy hand or you want to come back, Councillor Ball? Okay, got no response, so I'll take it as a legacy hand. And I think we are done with the questions, Isabella. So we can move on to the next item.
So Councillor Ahmed, before we move on, I know it's quite late. So I presume then the committee agrees for us to take the policy and the cumulative impact.
And my computer is about. I've been delaying my computer, and it's asking it's going to restart. So when it restarts, then I'm sorry I don't. But in the meantime, until it goes off, can the committee approve this licensing draft, first draft, to
Yes,
go
Chair.
on to the consultation?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yes, thank you,
Yeah,
Chair.
that is agreed. Councillor Ball, did he come back or what? Councillor Ball?
Oh, what was that? Sorry, no, that was, if there's a hand up, it's a legacy hand. I can't see a hand.
Okay, that's fine then.
I'm having
That's
some
fine.
difficulties with it, but I can't see a hand from my end.
That's fine. My computer will restart at some stage. I really don't have any other option. So Isabella, you can.
I'll summarize the next report.
Yeah, Julian Grant has also confirmed that he's approving. So we move on to the hearing updates now and enforcement.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ahmed. So obviously, all of the members of the committee would have seen my report, and I'm aware of your computer having to restart in the time, so I would just kind of focus on some of the summary. So the report that was provided to you covers a period of time between 2nd of June this year and 1st of September, so quite a short period of time. You will notice that from the licensing compliance side of things, our team has been focusing on massage and special treatment premises to ensure that they all have renewed their license, and they have, which is good news. And we've been conducting some late night visits, especially to shisha premises, to verify licensing complaints that we have seen a spike in some of those. And you may also recall that we were giving additional funding at the end of last year for proactive work that I've already mentioned previously through the Public Health Inequalities Fund. So as part of that fund, again, we've managed actually to secure a contractor specifically to start working on that project. And we've conducted under test purchase operations, which we haven't done those for a number of years from the alcohol perspective. So at the moment, we visited 12 shops specifically where we've used our 15-year-old volunteer where he tried to purchase alcohol. And unfortunately, there were 2 venues where they have failed to prevent the sales. So we'll be obviously taking enforcement action against them. You're very likely to see actually the application to review those premises coming in front of you in the next week or so. And we've also now proactively inspected over 30 licensed venues. So our licensing compliance team is quite small. We normally very much respond to complaints, but because of that fund, we are doing some proactive work, and some of that work again is in Southall because that's where we know that there's quite a few issues. In terms of the work of the licensing committee, you would see from the report that there were 12 applications. 9 of those were for new premises licenses where there were objections, some of them obviously from responsible authorities. We also had quite a few from local residents, and you would have seen that 5 of those premises licenses were refused by the licensing committee. We've also had 1 review of the premises where there was no further action proposed by the committee. So quite a range of decisions really there. I've also provided you with a summary of the licensing activity for the last year, where you can see that we've noted in general an increase in the number of new premises license applications, but also in our temporary exemption, temporary event notices, as well as an increase in reviews of premises licenses. As regards the reviews of the licenses, it's worth highlighting that 12 out of the 14 were actually initiated by our licensing officers. And we've also had last year a very first review brought on by our Safer Communities team, so our noise and antisocial behaviour team. So we're working a lot more closely with them. And there was only 1 review applied for by the police. The team is currently finalising some work on a couple of prosecutions as well for breaching licensing requirements, and you'll be very likely seeing some of the comms on that piece of work as well. So that's in terms of the update, and I'll be happy to take any questions in regards to that specifically. Councillor Ahmed, you on mute, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you, Isabella. Any question from the colleagues? There's no indication of questions, Isabella, so I think we're all happy with that. In that case, we have come toward the end of the meeting, and the next meeting will be held on Tuesday, 4th of February next year. So until that, I think we are done. And if there is nothing else, anybody wants to add anything, officers?
Joe's put his hand up, Chair.
Yes, please, Chair. I just wanted to, I know the committee isn't meeting until the 4th of February, but please can all the members just look out for all the comms that we'll be doing with the consultation, share it with your constituents and other different bodies that you'll come into contact with, whether it's the allotment association or the residents association or whoever. We'd be really pleased to get a lot of consultation responses, both whether it's to endorse the approach and support it, or to suggest any changes or amendments. That will be the core piece of work over November and December, having that consultation done. I'd love to get the over 6,000 responses that the nighttime economy strategy got, but we shall have to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Bacchini, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, first I'd like to thank all the officers for the amazing presentation tonight. And I also like to add a little remark on the police and the nuisance team
Can we leave that because they are not present here, so we can take that privately with Isabella.
Yes, okay.
Okay,
All right then.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, I think we've come to the end of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your contribution, and see you at the next meeting. The meeting is now closed.